go to Geshe. Well, what's your scholarly background and how does the Yoga Sutra fit?
Mm-hmm.
And then same thing to you, basically.
Right.
You're talking about Sri Patali choice. And then you're going to ask after that to the modern yoga practitioner who thinks of yoga as a physical practice.
What does this 2,000-year-old text have to offer?
Yep. Do you want me to write that down on a cue card for you?
No, it's okay. Okay.
And then the next question you have is, Patanjali opens his book with his famous definition of yoga.
Right. and Vritti
Vritti seems to be the key core word.
Yeah, the key word, I'll just say. The key word in the way that I see the world wrong.
Yeah. So you say, can you tell us about your translation of this verse?
Mm-hmm.
And then those are the two that are slotted for you.
Okay.
Two needs to be promoted.
What do you mean two that are slotted for me?
In the sequence, there
Okay.
are two questions that are assigned to you to ask to Geshe.
Gotcha.
Look at the calendar. Okay. There they are. Oh, it's so cool to see Geshe and Earle together.
Yeah, that's great.
Dude, I can't wait for this. Should have popped popcorn. Okay, so your mic's gonna be on the whole time, so like get your sneezes out and stuff.
Yeah. I was thinking of that.
And then where's your liquid? You got your liquid.
Loud thing is that
It's actually exhausted.
It's exhausted.
Yeah. You just throw some water in there.
It is being simultaneously translated.
Yes. Also deep pauses.
So we're gonna try not to.
When you breathe, when you finish a sentence, pause. But don't wait for it to. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Just talk slow. Then say your next.
Oh, thanks, man.
Master Campbell.
Your hair looks good, Earle. I don't know if they can hear us. Maybe not yet. I just thought of something too. We should probably lock the front door.
Welcome to the Yoga Studies Institute event hosted by Asian Legacy Library. We've called this talk the Yoga Sutras through the lens of 1,000 days of silence, where we'll be discussing Geshe Michael's translation of the Yoga Sutra and also talking a little bit about the upcoming course where Geshe will be teaching the second chapter, Sadhana Pada of the Yoga Sutra. So I want to quickly introduce the speakers involved. Geshe Michael doesn't need a lot of introduction, but I was trying to think of all the amazing things you've done, all the projects and translations. What's the one that I admire the most? And it was how you've changed my heart and my mind. And because that's the hardest project.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking that, that's what brings us all together. There's over 1,000 people on the call, and that sentiment is shared around the world. So it's great to see you again and to share this time.
It is nice. Yes.
And we've also got John Campbell, will be a speaker. He's the director of the Sanskrit preservation for the Asian Legacy Library. One of my favorite all-time yogis, real yoga practitioner who did this for decades, went to India to study yoga back before it was cool and easy. So really looking forward to share this time with John also. And thank you, Asian Legacy Library, for hosting. John Brady will be joining us to discuss that project a little bit. And Connie O'Brien from the Yoga Studies Institute, thank you for organizing the event. Bob Serino. And Tim, director of ACI, Asian Classics Institute, thanks for helping out. Jigme Pachi, thank you all for joining us and putting this on, and all our partners as well. With that, let's start.
Cool.
The first thing, I just wanted to set some context. I'm curious, the Yoga Sutras, if that was part of your traditional scholastics background, and if not, where you ran into the text and why you started to study it.
So the Yoga Sutra is not part of the Geshe course. And although Patanjali is mentioned in the traditions of 1,000 years ago in Tibet, it's not specifically taught in the Geshe course. And I was just going into a 3-year retreat. I had about a year to get ready for a 3-year retreat. And my friends were like, "You're gonna need to do some exercise," And I was in New York City, and there was a beautiful Indian dance teacher, and I was attracted to Indian dance, and so I went to this teacher and I said, I'm gonna do a 3-year retreat, and I'd like to learn some Indian dance so I can get exercise during retreat. And she said, "I'm leaving town tomorrow and I won't be back. So I suggest you try these these guys doing yoga." And it's interesting that at that time there was one yoga studio in New York City that I'm aware of. And it was Jivamukti, and they were teaching out of a clothing store. And at night, they'd push all the clothing racks to the side, and they'd have small classes in this clothing store. And so I went, and I was very fortunate that I got permission to go. I went and talked to David, Sharon, and Ruth, and they said, "Okay, come and let's do a class." And that's how I got started. And they were so interested in the Yoga Sutra. Ruth had studied with they had studied with the same teachers that John studied with, and that's how I got interested in it.
Yeah. Okay, we'll touch back more on that later. But I have the same question for John Campbell. I'm wondering what your experience is with the text and whether you studied in India with Sri Patabi Joyce, or where you came across the text and how you ran into it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Geshe-la, for joining the conversation like this. It's a real treat. I heard about the Yoga Sutras shortly after I started practicing yoga in the early 90s with Sri K. Patabi Joyce. And I just had heard of the book, and it seemed like something that I should know about because it has a cool title, Yoga Sutra. It must be important for yoga. And so I started, after a little while, asking my teacher if he would teach about that. And he said no. he said, no, you're just not going to understand it. So, don't learn that, or don't study that. He just turned me down flat. And then I continued to practice, and I started to study Sanskrit, and I had some study of other important, yoga treatises. And then I think it was in 2002, it could have been 2003, I heard about a teaching on the Yoga Sutra by Geshe Michael that was taking place in a field, in some kind of like scrubby desert field in southern Arizona. And I thought, that sounds really cool. I'm gonna do that. So my wife and I got plane tickets and made our way out into the cow pasture, wherever it was. I guess it was more like a rattlesnake pasture, and attended those set of I think it was 4 days of teaching where Geshe was coming out of this amazing 1,000 days of silent retreat. And I have some really vivid memories of that, but the most powerful was the first entire day of the teaching he devoted to thanking everybody, and especially his teachers, and the depth of feeling and the sweetness. It was so moving to me. I think after that, I started really looking into the text because of the sort of topics that came up, but especially because of that emotion that came through, and the deep, some kind of really powerful experience that was happening.
Great. I was at that teaching too, and it was such a special time in the rattlesnake there.
Yeah.
I want to jump in and talk about the translation process in that retreat, because through the Asian Legacy Library, you've built up this searchable database of hundreds of millions of pages of text. And I know you use that extensively in all of your translations. You didn't have access to any of that in 3-year retreats. So I'm curious about the process.
We had an interesting idea going into retreat with, I've spent the 20 years before that, I spent in the ancient books, in the Geshe course in the monastery. So that's a 25-year study. And we live in the books, we spend all day in the books, we memorize them, we debate them. You're not allowed to take a book to the debate ground, you have to memorize it. And then we made a big decision in the 3-year retreat that we would not use books for a year or a year and a half, I don't remember, and it's 20 years ago. And we decided not to use books for about at least a year. And so we didn't look at books. I didn't take any books in with me. And then I was, hungry for books. And after a year, and by the way, during that year, we memorized the Yoga Sutra and parts of I guess the first half of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And so we worked on it. And then I decided to translate it. And I did bring in a couple of important reference books. And I'll tell you the story about one. It's called Locus Chandra's Sanskrit Tibetan Dictionary. And this is a work that was put together by 2 generations of great scholars from India. And it was multi-volume. They put it out in fascicles. Every year they put out another fascicle. And it's this huge, multi-volume connection between the ancient Tibetan tradition and the ancient Sanskrit tradition. And this one scholar and his father, Raghuvira, in India, put it together. And he's still alive. The son is still alive. I think he's 90 something. And so I did use that. And at the same period, we were trying to have an input in our Sanskrit centers in India, in Varanasi and other cities in India. we were having trouble. The input operators were having trouble because it's Sanskrit and Tibetan. And it was difficult to find anybody who could do both. And I remember they were struggling to input it. And then some guy showed up. I don't know, he's from some university. We didn't ask him. He just happened to be studying ancient languages in India at the time. And he voluntarily showed up and he started helping the input operators. And he spent, I don't know, I'm guessing a year making sure the data was correct. And the input of that was a huge achievement. I mean, hundreds of years, this was a great achievement. And it made the job of translating the Yoga Sutra very easy. And that was John Campbell. Oh, and wow. he just was studying in India through his university. And nobody asked him, nobody paid him. And he showed up and he said, this needs work, this needs to be, you know, more precise. And I have to say that the input of that work is flawless. I use it every day. And he really made it, I mean, honestly, made it perfect. I'm a very picky person. And it was perfectly done. So that's actually how I got to know John.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had that to use the hard copy during the 3-year retreat. Yeah. Because of John.
I don't know if you remember this, but before I also did a 3-year retreat. Yeah. And I asked Geshe Michael what I should study during that retreat. And he said, dig one hole very deep, dig 1,000-foot hole. Don't dig a 1,001-foot holes. And so I studied one text, and I chose the Yoga Sutra.
Wow.
And it took me 2.5 years to memorize. You're much quicker. But it was.
How long did it take you to forget?
Well, I had to memorize it. You forget it 4 times, so you have to memorize it 5 times.
There's a joke in Tibet that I've forgotten more text than you ever memorized.
So the process of being in retreat was so beautiful because the mind has so much clarity, and it really allowed me to get immersed in that text and memorizing it. The song of the Yoga Sutra sings to you. And so I'd love to know how the experience of translating a text from deep retreat, what that was like.
I think, like you say, it was singing in your head all day because we weren't allowed to talk, and we were strict, and we really didn't talk. I did come out every 6 months and give a public talk with a blindfold on, but we didn't converse at all. Yeah, I think we said loud words once in a while, like if there's a rattlesnake on your lap or something like that. And by the way, I'll tell you a funny story. I mean, David Life and Sharon came to teach us every 6 months. So we would ask great teachers to come, and they would talk to us, and we would do, you know, they would teach us deeper yoga poses and things like that. But I remember one day they wanted, it was, they said that there were a small group of 5 of us, and they said, by the way, you guys are going to have to come out and retreat this week, one person at a time. And we're like, and they said, the retreat ran out of money, and they want you guys to come out, each person come out for a month and work at McDonald's, and then come back in, you know. And we were like, you know, like this. And then they said, April Fools. It was April 1st, you know. And we were like, and then they said, David said, I have to go to the bathroom, you know. And we were like, and there was an outhouse close to where they were teaching us. And there was a rattlesnake living in the bottom. And we all knew it. Of course, it was about 50 feet deep. So he couldn't get to your important asana. But we sent him over there, and we were like this, you know, and then he came running out, and it was really cute. I think for me, I would recite it mentally. So we didn't recite it verbally. I would recite it in my mind. And I would do it in the morning when I woke up, and I would recite it in my head. And so I think for 3 years, it was I think that's even nicer, right? You just internalize it completely. So I would just recite it in my mind every morning. And frankly, when things got hard, which it does get hard, as you know, and through your retreat, you have bad days.
Yeah.
And I would recite it. It was a big comfort to me. I don't know why, but I would recite it in my mind if I was having a bad day. I would recite it twice or something like that. So I think there's a blessing of the Sanskrit. What do you think, John? Do you get that
Yeah.
feeling?
Well, I definitely think there's at the very least, to get into that kind of text, you need to have a deep familiarity with the terms, and you need to kind of approach the terms on their, on their own basis, which is in their language. So then if you can, in other words, yes, you should, it's a great blessing to do it in Sanskrit. And as you know, in the tradition, it's really, you first memorize it, and then it starts to unfold. It gives up, you approach it with this sort of reverence, and it then can start to give up some of its secrets. Because it is a very difficult text, and it is very deep. I would like to hear, Geshe, what you say about, this 2,000-year-old book. What does it have to offer the modern yoga practitioner? I found it to be, this deep exploration. But I'd love to hear what you say about that.
And thank you for the question, John. I think for me, it's a relatively short. It's a short piece. We study some very long pieces. I studied Abhidharma Kosha. I memorized the first 3 chapters of that, and that took 12 years. And that's a long and difficult process. So the Yoga Sutra is 200, I think, and 10 or something like verses, depending on which version you're talking about. And it's relatively easy to memorize. So I feel like it's a spiritual guidebook. It's a short and sweet, and it has all the important points in it. So I feel like if you had to take all the ancient books of India that I work with, and you had to squish them into one little book that you could use as a day-to-day guide, I think the Yoga Sutra is amazing. I think it's a perfect book as a daily guide to your spiritual practice. And
since it is really compact, each of the sutras then can be, they can carry an enormous amount of information for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and by the way, I should say that it's confusing when we talk about sutra, because sometimes sutra means a verse inside of a larger book, and sometimes sutra means the larger book. So sometimes you get confused, and people will say Yoga Sutras or Yoga Sutra, and basically, but it's an amazing summary of all the whole path of spiritual practice. And if you had to take the most important ideas from, I don't know, 1,000 years of ancient India, they're all in there. It's really cool.
That's one of the things that I love about your translation is it's a book you can open up and find the short translation and use that as a theme for a yoga class. It's just the conciseness of the text and the conciseness of your translation is very beautiful. But also, I suspect there's some challenges with that. A lot of your translations, your footnotes are longer than that whole text. Your whole translation.
There's a story to that. And I was, I had a very great publisher. So it was Doubleday, which is now Random House and Penguin, which is all owned by Bertelsmann, which is the largest in the world. And my publisher, my editor was the Pope's editor and Mother Teresa's editor. And it was kind of heavy. And so he would actually guide me. And I said I have an 800-page manuscript. I decided to write a novel about the Yoga Sutra. And he said back where he were, he said, forget it. And I actually stopped the 800-page book at 800 pages. It was about 1/3 finished. And I cut it all to 400 pages, which is called How Yoga Works. And it's a novel about a young woman in ancient Tibetan, Asia, India, teaching yoga, and cut that to 400 pages. And then when I got out of retreat, he said, could you cut it to 100 pages? And I said, no, it's 200 and something verses.
Yeah.
I can't cut it to 100 pages, it's not possible. And he said, well, I challenge you to do it. And so I was kind of irritated, but finally, I did cut it to, I combined verses and we made the Essential Yoga Sutra. And that's a great book for yoga studios that want to teach the Yoga Sutra, but How Yoga Works, which is a novel, which is longer, they refused to publish that Doubleday. And then if someone I didn't know offered to publish it in New York City, and that was published. And that's become one of the best sellers in this category on Amazon, for example. And it was kind of shocking.
Right.
So I really do think that by reading that story, fiction about a young woman trying to use the Yoga Sutra in ancient India, you can get insights that you can't get through just the translation of the sutra. But if you want to just teach the sutra and the various verses, then you should use the Essential Yoga Sutra. But I kind of prefer the novel, and there's a longer one. And actually, we were thinking to make it into a movie, and Steven Spielberg's company put an option on it. I don't think they're going to do it, but I think this, to tell it through a story is a fun thing. Yeah.
Gisela, I have a question about the content of the translation, and your translation is pretty distinct. It differs from pretty much any other translation that you can find out there, and I want to focus on the famous opening definition of yoga that Master Patanjali gives. He says that yoga is chitta vritti nirodha, and I can't, in my exploration and practice of yoga, it's pretty clear to me that Patanjali is telling me that the way I look at the world is all wrong, and it's causing me a lot of problems. Your translation puts it so beautifully, and yet it is different. Really almost unique in English translations. And I wanted you to particularly, if you could talk about how you translated this word vritti, and this turning.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the question. And I struggled with this line. It should be the first line, right? I think it's the second line, but yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. And, if you want to learn Sanskrit, which is a great thing to learn, and I was trained in Sanskrit at Princeton by the chairman of the Ancient Languages Department, which was Samuel Atkinson. And we worked for a few years on that and other texts. And then he retired. He got his Ph.D. from Princeton, and he was hired the day after he graduated, and he stayed there his whole life. And then when he retired, we retired together to his home on the New Jersey seashore. And so I would hang out there with him. And basically his idea of Sanskrit was called generative grammar, which means you can predict Sanskrit. Sanskrit is totally normal, which is not true of almost any language. And there are 800 verbal roots. There are 800 roots of Sanskrit. And then you can actually teach a computer to generate generative all the words. So if you want a noun, you just say, I want a noun, and it will take the root and change it into a noun. And it's very, very regular, which is irregular in the study of languages. And so verti is the key word here, which means a turning. And it comes from a root vert or vert. And by the way, vocalic R, which is is often corrupted to re, like crit or Krishna, Krishna, for example, which is Krishna. And there is a KRI, a separate syllable in Sanskrit, so they shouldn't be confused. KIR and KRI are completely different. And anyway, so it's not vritti, it's verti. And vert means to spin or to turn something. And I think you can best understand it from the cognates. So what are the English words that come from vert? And my favorite one is weird. Obviously vortex, we're in Sedona.
Yeah.
We're actually sitting under the red rocks. And vortex means a spinning place or something like that. And vert, wire, comes from that because it's twistable, malleable. And so it means to twist something almost in a perverted way. Pervert comes from that. So perverted or twisted in a wrong way is I believe the sense of that yoga chitta vritti. So to translate it as any functioning of the mind, to say the turning of the mind or the working of the mind is a classic mistake. This is a classic error that the goal of yoga or the goal of meditation is to stop your mind, and you shouldn't think about anything. And I think, I was trained for many years that the goal of meditation and yoga is to sharpen your mind and to make it more pure and more flexible. And then the idea that meditation is meant to shut down your mind, you have to try to guess where that's going to. And I'm in the mood this week. My mother-in-law is in the hospital tonight. Last night, we actually, someone had to sit with her all night. And hers, chitta vritti nirodha, the turning of her mind is shutting down. And it's not a nice thing. It's not a good thing. She's confused. She's unaware. She can't speak anymore. And it's not a holy place. It's a confused place. And so I think the idea that the goal of a 3-year retreat, as you know, would be to just become like that. It's obviously not the meaning of, a spiritual person like Gandhi or something, he was a lawyer, he was very sharp, and his thinking brought him to a high moral position. So the vritti they're talking about, the turning of the mind they're talking about is the weird mind, which means to misunderstand the world. Yeah. And then you react to it wrong. If you think the world is coming this way, and the people you meet that you don't like are not coming from you, they're coming at you, then that's a twisting of reality. And then when you untwist the wire, unweird, you realize that if you meet someone who's irritating, it's a reflection of yourself. And it's coming from the karmic seeds that you've planted. And in fact, how those seeds are planted is one of the biggest topics of the sutra. So it's a cool thing.
Yeah. That process comes up in the second chapter.
Yeah.
Similar to the 6 steps of Maitreya.
Yeah.
So we'll get into, in the second chapter, when Geshe Michael teaches, we'll get into that process of how the actions that we've done and how we keep our morality influences that twisting or untwisting.
I think the second chapter is also important because it's where the Ashtanga is first taught. John, and I wondered if you might want to say something about Ashtanga in the sense of those 8. We think of Ashtanga as one system of yoga. In fact, it's the system that you studied the most and I studied a lot. And how would you describe, John, the difference between, Ashtanga as we hear it used in everyday usage among yoga people, and in the second chapter, which is what we're studying this time?
Yeah, the Ashtanga practice is usually typically misunderstood as being, just the physical asana practice. That's what people encounter when they go to a yoga studio, and it is the asana practice combined with the breathing is a very powerful practice. It sort of directly starts to manipulate the energies, the subtle energies of the body, which people feel very quickly, and it sort of gives them pause about, well, maybe the world isn't exactly the way I thought it was. The it's a kind of a translation problem itself, to approach this yoga of 8 limbs that Master Patanjali is talking about, because some of those fundamental limbs, really the first 2, the yama and niyama, which are sort of ethical and psychological grounding in the world, in a sense, I think in Patanjali's system and the systems that he inherited, both from the Brahminical, but also very much from the Buddhist and Abhidharma side, were assumed. It was a given that you would need to be taking care of the way you treated others, or put it this way, how you treated others was then going to very much mold and shape the way the world that you encountered. So it's he certainly goes into the information about what those individual stages or aspects of morality are, but he doesn't really dwell on them so much because, again, it's assumed. It's just really important for him to make clear that there are weird ways of being in the world, of twisting around, really, that could apply to each one of these subcategories in the first 2 limbs. You could, but as a general guideline, being truthful, non-harming, and so forth, that these are really prerequisites to the asana practice. And as I was talking about with a friend last night, once you get up into the asana practice, which then naturally develops over time into the pranayama practice, you are starting to really, as we thought about it as an accelerant, the same way you got like an accelerant for fire, and it intensifies whatever. We had this term in yoga practice, drishti, which means literally your view or your gaze. It also refers to your philosophical view, the way that you look at the world. It has, so it's a double-edged sword. It can strongly intensify your self-grasping, materialistic, egocentric view, and it can make you very beautiful and strong and charismatic when the body starts to wear out and your charisma starts to fade, and that can become pretty tragic. At the same time, it's a technology for intensifying the possibility of what they call then the inner limbs of practice, as you know. So the first 4 limbs of Ashtanga practice are called the external limbs, and then you've got kind of a swinging door of pranayama that kind of goes in between them, and then the inner limbs, which begin to be addressed in that second chapter, and then go on into the third chapter in particular. But I'm very excited about the opportunity to listen to your teaching on this second chapter, on this practice chapter, because this is the kind of the meat of it, how you get started. Because I can't wake up in the morning and decide today I'm going to start to like change the way I look at the world. I can't think my way into a different way of acting. I typically act my way into a different way of thinking.
Did you want to add to that? Or?
I'm just thinking, I mean, if I had to say the most important principle of the whole Yoga Sutra and the whole yoga practice and the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, you know, Lung Sim Chukpa Chikpa, which is very, very famous in the Tibetan practice of yoga, which comes from India, which comes from these texts. And it's the idea that prana and your thoughts are traveling together through the body. So, you know, they say that prana is like the horse and your thoughts are like the horse rider. And as anyone who ever tried to ride a horse knows, and by the way, I come from Arizona. When I went to the East Coast for college, they put me on a horse. They said, "You're from Arizona, you know, you can ride horses." And that was the second time I'd ever ridden a horse. And he took off. It was actually a lake called Lake Carnegie where we used to row at Princeton. And I remember, and he almost tossed me. I pulled and he threw me off, totally threw me off on the ground. I never got on a horse since then. And so you got to think of the horse as your prana. And then Geshe Michael on top of a horse is like your thinking, your mind, you know, and it's an interesting relationship. So sometimes the horse is running the rider, as happened with me, and sometimes the rider is running the horse. So there's this interchange between the horse and the rider. So can you control your prana by using, for example, pranayama, which means the control of the ayama, the breath, control the inner winds, the prana, which is called chi in Chinese, as everybody knows, and ki in Japanese, and I guess Korean. But part of the idea of the second chapter is introducing for the first time in the text the interaction between the horse and the rider. So can you, with your thoughts, learn to control your breathing process and thus your body? Or can you do practices with your body which help to control your breath and your inner winds, which is going to improve the spiritual functioning of your mind? And so I love the second chapter because it's all about, as John said, it's all about the interchange between these two. And there are some ashtangas, some of the angas, some of the components of yoga are physical, and then the later ones are spiritual and mental. And then there are some that are kind of crossovers. I can think of pranayama and also pratyahara, which is the withdrawal of the senses. So cool topic that comes up. I think the second chapter, John, I think I smell that you would agree it's almost more substantive than the first chapter. The second chapter is, John called it the guts of the Yoga Sutra. And I would agree. I think it's the most important chapter of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the one that it's sort of the entry point. That's I sometimes say, it's not a novel. It's not, you're not like picking up, a Tom Clancy where you start at the beginning and it goes to the end. It's a total piece, and that's the sutra form, like, this incredibly concise form with information and packed into it. And it is problematic, for where do you start, right? Because Patanjali starts with this powerful statement about the nature of yoga, but he's already talking about the achievement of this extraordinary transcendence, and that presumes a practice and the extinguishing of afflictive ways of turning, your world around in weird ways. So the second chapter, in my experience, is the entry point. And they don't say, hey, start here. But if I were to suggest to anybody, it would be, yeah, hey, start here. And then take it from there. And then it goes, so you get to the end and then you start at the beginning. It's really sort of circular. I have a question, Geshe-la, about your, particular the way that you came to certain insights about the meaning of the text in your 1,000 days of silent retreat. And was that can you say that there was a particular unfolding of the meaning of the text? And you mentioned that you spent the whole first year memorizing it. And was that a time where it still didn't mean much to you, and then it kind of started to like flower or blossom? How did that work?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'd like to say something that I think will be encouraging to everybody, is that I had just started physical yoga a year before I went into 3-year retreats. And now it's been about over 20 years but of asana practice. But at the time, it was only about a year or something. And I can remember the first day of asana, and it was going out. I thought, well, I'm out in nature, and I was near a wash, like a dry river, and it had oak trees, which is unusual in the desert, but because of the river flowed sometimes, the trees could grow there. So I would practice under. I thought, oh, this would be beautiful. I'll go practice under this oak tree. And I went out and started practicing, and it was intense sun. I mean, as you know, intensely hot, and the sunlight was a strong. In fact, I got a operation recently to cut off the sun, some of the sunspot, and it was really, really intense. And I remember after just a few weeks of asana practice under the oak tree, I was trying to find some sand to make it softer, and I reached down into this sandy spot, and a huge rattlesnake. I startled him, and he startled me. And I really believe he was about 12 feet long, 4 meters. And he came up out of the grass horizontally. His whole body came up, like parallel to the ground. It was weird. And he was huge. And he just came out of the grass, he was floating there, and he dropped down. I'm like, I was incredibly frightened. So for a couple of days, I didn't go out to the tree. I worked, but it's hard in a yurt during the summer to do yoga. We would just be dripping, and there'd be puddles of water after yoga. But I went back out, and then he used to come and watch, and he would curl up under the trunk of the tree, and he would just watch the asanas. And there's this big connection between serpents and snakes and asana practice.
And Patanjali.
You probably know more about that than I do. But it was kind of unreal. But so me and the snake, we kind of did our practice together for years. For 2-3 years. And then we got to know each other. He would eat rabbits. He would grab whole rabbits and slowly digest them. And one of our fellow retreatants pulled a rabbit out of his mouth, and with one leg had dissolved already. And that rabbit survived. And they kept him as a pet, the cooks, for the 3-year retreat. By the way, one of the cooks is here, and they cooked 1,000 meals. 3,000 meals. We were getting deliveries. We never saw the
Mhm.
we had a special box, and they would put the food in the box. And so I'd say it was a perfect introduction to the Yoga Sutra because it was 1,000 days uninterrupted practice. So we didn't have anything else to do, and we could do a nice slow asana practice, and then we could do pranayama practices, and that's really the only time in my life that I had time to do the other practices, like cleansing practices, for like trying to use a thread in your nose and things. And I did do it for about a year or two, and it was very effective. It was very nice. I haven't had time since then to do that, but I think one of the results of this class, upcoming class, I think, is if people could be encouraged to do even a 3-day retreat or a 1-week retreat. I think you can speak to that.
Yeah, well, I'll speak to the course a little bit.
Or
Really
retreat.
retreat. Well, I can
even
relate
a
to
3-day retreat.
retreat's amazing. It's like you said, it's hard to make excuses not to practice.
There's no TV,
So
there's no
I
internet.
have nothing to do for 3, like the house is clean. And then it's just like that. The opportunity to find what practices really work is a real benefit from retreat for me, and to try all of these things that we don't have time for in a normal life, and to have the consistency of practice. Satu Durga Kala Nairantarya is one of the verses that we studied in the first chapter. Having that over a long period of time, consistent practice and retreat is just the ultimate opportunity to do that, and to start to learn how to eat properly, and what food makes my body run, and how to sleep properly, and all of these things, that all of the bad habits that we can start to eliminate through retreat.
I'm just curious of what some breakthroughs in your yoga practice were, like specific breakthroughs that you had. I mean, 3 years is a long time to experiment with different physical practices and meditation.
I think it was conceptualizing yoga as a much bigger idea, not just the physical practice, which kind of at that time came kind of easily, but to see it as Patanjali's book, as I memorized it, it's like, oh, this is a meditation text. It's not a text on physical yoga. It's a text on what to do with your mind.
How did you find your physical practices affecting your meditations? I'm curious.
In a subtle way, not directly, not like I would do my yoga and then sit down and have a great meditation. It was much more long-term, feeling like something magical is happening in my body that my physical practice is doing, and the cleansing practices, and the sleeping right, and the eating right, and that all, and it's hard to be immoral in a 3-year retreat.
That's good. Mentally.
Harder. And so it all comes together that it's hard to say, well, my yoga practice resulted in this, because it was a whole lifestyle. Yoga became a lifestyle. And that lifestyle was so conducive to a 3-year retreat. Was the happiest I've ever been in my life. And my mind was so joyful, and just feeling very in touch with nature and the stars, and the big picture just all came together. It was a yogic lifestyle that was very beautiful. So to be able to just, go ahead, John.
I'm sorry, Earle, but what you're making me think about is how Patanjali, author of the Yoga Sutra, biographically we know nothing about, but it's a very unusual name, and the Master Patanjali is associated traditionally with the 3 sciences: the science of grammar or of language, the science of Ayurveda or medicine and longevity, and then the science of the mind, which is the practice of yoga. And as I think in Ayurveda, traditional Indian medicine, they're kind of obsessed with digestion. Digestion and pooping is like everything, it's like constant concern. And so what it's really ultimately about, the Ayurvedic practice is about digestion and assimilation, right? Assimilation of nutrition. And then that applies to yoga, and it's assimilation of experience. So
Yeah.
there is a certain way that we extract, obviously, you know, whether it's raw data, but then how does that turn into the nutrition of our mental and psychological experience? Are we becoming more toxic as we go along? And or are we somehow, what you're describing in your beautiful experience of long retreat, of starting to digest and assimilate, you know, this extraordinary experience of just, you know, being a living being under the stars?
Yeah, and to feed on that idea, now to plug the course a little bit, we will be integrating all of those elements. So the course starts on the 21st, and then it'll lead with a led yoga class, asana class, and then we'll have a meditation class. And then Geshe Michael will teach the second chapter, Sadhana Pada of the Yoga Sutras. And then John Campbell will teach a Sanskrit class, which I'm really excited about. And then in the evening, we'll have an opportunity for participants to come together as a community and to discuss the homework questions and the ideas, and to hopefully get into a little bit of debate and to get deeper into the teachings every day. So it's going to be a very well-rounded program. And then that, I was wondering if there was anything about the content you wanted to hit on, so that people know a little bit about what they're getting into. Or,
you know, now that we're talking about 3-year retreat, and I'd like to tell one story that we were using a book by a yogi called David Swenson, who's a great practitioner, a great person, and a great yoga practitioner. They somehow go together. And so it's funny, I said, I wrote a note out in the food basket, and I said, try to find this guy, you know, this book is amazing. And we wrote him a book, wrote him a note and said, you know, would you be willing to come and give us some classes? And he did. You know, he flew from, I don't know, East Coast of America, and he flew out. He didn't know, he never met me or any of us, and he flew out, and he came and we were silent, and he taught us asana classes, and he spoke about yoga. He's an amazing practitioner, and he's an amazing person, which goes together. And I just like to say the one practice that that stuck with me, and I think it's relevant to all of us, is that I couldn't touch my feet at that time. David Lyons said when the first time he met me, I looked like a Pillsbury doughboy. I had a big stomach, and I had trouble touching my knees. And then David said, okay, I have a suggestion for you, Geshe Michael. And he brought 3 or 4 telephone books, you know, with very thin pages, thousands of thin pages. And then he said, okay, what I want you to do, can you touch the top one? I said, just barely. And he said, every day tear out 1 page and then touch it again. And I did that. And then I could finally touch my toes, and then finally I could put my hands under the soles of my feet. And I think that's, for me, the story of yoga, the story of the Yoga Sutra. It takes patience, and it takes perseverance. You're not gonna change overnight. Your asana practice doesn't change overnight, and it's a lifetime thing, and that's a good thing, because it really enriches your whole life. It's not a course that you're going to finish in a few weeks. It's a lifetime practice that will sustain you for the rest of your life, especially as you get older. It keeps you incredibly healthy. John Brady, a friend of mine, is a massage therapist, and he had a chance to work on John, and he said, this is the healthiest human body I've ever seen. And I was like shocked, but I wondered John was gonna.
Yeah, this is a nice intro for John, the healthiest human being.
Come on, healthiest human body.
Thanks, Earle. Thank you, Geshe Michael.
Yeah.
Oh, what an incredible conversation brought to you by the Yoga Studies Institute. And it's funny, the Yoga Sutra flows down from the snow on the mountain, as we know, comes from our database, right?
Mhm.
And over 34 years ago, we started actually creating and producing data from Princeton University.
Mhm.
And this was the beginning of something we had no idea would explode into an international, literally a global organization with 6 preservation centers throughout the world, primarily in Asia and East Asia. And what we do at Asian Legacy Library is that we locate and digitally preserve, and then we disseminate. We actually give and distribute countless pages of data
For free.
for free. And each of the preservation partners around the world, right, have staffs of not only input operators, but scanners and people that go and locate private collections for us. And so this is the beginning of something new with Asian Legacy Library. Starting in July, we're going to be actually launching our new website. And I think it's going to be quite a sports car search engine. We have over 3 million scans of Sanskrit and derivatives and dialects of Sanskrit, as well as 12 private catalog collections that we've collected now since 1990.
Mhm.
So it's an exciting moment for us to actually launch and ramp up our complete collection that really has not been seen yet. So it's really an exciting time, Geshe Michael and Earle and YSI, to expose the world to what we've done so diligently and, struggled and then achieved and struggled more and achieved. And here we are 34 years later.
I had an interesting experience, which you guys know about, but so I was before my 3-year retreat, I was invited to go and speak at a very famous yoga center in the Bahamas. And they're very open to many traditions. In fact, while I was there, I had a chance, we ate dinner together, all the teachers ate together. And I was sitting with Hindu masters and Jewish masters and Christian masters and Buddhist masters. And it's an amazing feeling there. And it's an amazing tradition there, that they are very open to many, many different traditions. And eventually I was invited for 4 years, to go for 4 years. Each year we would cover one of the chapters, and I would teach opposite a great Hindu master. And so we had a funny system. He would teach a class in the morning, and I would attend the class, and then I would do the same chapters from the Yoga Sutra from my tradition in the afternoon. And then, then we would chant sutras together, and then we would do asana together, and then we'd go swimming because there are places on a beautiful beach. And I think the way we approached it, and because of the eclectic nature of that center is so open to many traditions, that instead of saying mine's right, yours wrong, we actually taught together. And we didn't try to teach the same. We taught it our own way. And I sat through a total of 10 years of this other teacher's explanations. And in a way, I mastered his tradition. And I think he mastered my tradition. And the result was that we became very close. And we saw the beauty and the great parts of what the other tradition said. And I think it's interesting that we didn't try to, convince each other, or we didn't try to you know, push the other person into believing our system. We just listened to each other closely. In fact, recently I was cleaning out my house because I had to make room for my mother-in-law, and I found my notebooks from those lectures that he gave, and I was looking through them and saying how beautiful it is. So I would encourage people to listen to different ways of explaining the Yoga Sutra, and I think you will be enriched by everyone, and it will make your life better. And it's one text that we can use to bring people together from different traditions. I think it's cool.
Thank you, Geshe. Next question is, after practicing yoga for quite a while, these people seem to always meet with good luck and have good fortune, and good things seem to happen in their life. Why did that happen? How is that related to doing asana practices and then creating good things that happen in life?
John, can you answer to that?
Sure. One of the things that I think I personally address every day is what comes first, my meditation or my yoga. And yeah, of course, you know, the food intake is always essential as well. But it's a funny conclusion. I've come to the conclusion that my asana practice literally feeds my meditation practice. And it has a contributing factor to going deeper in my meditation. And not to say that, you know, yoga doesn't give you what I call eureka moments, these moments that are purely pranic in nature, and the application of what we've studied for years in terms of, you know, the emptiness of asana itself. When you address that emptiness of the actual painstaking, I got to do my yoga today, it implies that you're actually realizing what asana is opening up in your meditation. You know, this subtle body and mind that banging on the pipes, which is the asana system, contributes to when you're subtly getting deeper. Your breath stops for 5 minutes in your deep meditation, but your subtle-minded body start exposing itself. So I think this combination is such a beautiful, it's like the perfect martini, right? you know, not to say that we do that, but I'm just saying as a contextual metaphor, this is the elixir that you can say is quantifiably deathless. And I believe that personally, as my practice shows me.
Thank you, JP. The next question here is about how can I take my asana practice to the next level, in the sense of, if I'm just on the mat doing asana day in, day out, how can I take that to the level of making sure that I'm doing that for a higher purpose and for a greater goal? Because it seems that in my practice, it feels like things just kind of get stale a little bit. But how do I make sure that I'm elevating that and keeping it, that I'm doing it for something higher?
Earle, do you have an idea?
Yeah, I think come to the Yoga Sutra course.
There you go. Yeah.
Because we learn the bigger context of why we get on the yoga mat, and the theory behind what Geshe was saying of how those inner and outer methods affect the mind, the lungsam jukpa chikpa, and the importance of setting our motivation when they get on the mat, and seeing yoga as a big picture, as a full picture. And then I think partly what JB was alluding to also, one of the things that I think drives us in our practice is the community that is found.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such a strong influence on us. And that's one of the things we're really hoping to create with the Yoga Studies Institute for people, is not just an opportunity to learn the classes from Geshe Michael, which is obviously a very rare, incredible opportunity, and to learn the asanas from some really great teachers, and to learn some meditation from people that have done, I don't know how many years of retreat is in this room, but it's probably 30.
There's a lot of years there.
And also to have the community come together where we can learn from each other. And that's right now for me in this room, it's such a beautiful thing to get to share some time,
Amazing.
Geshe, with you and my 3-year retreat
Special.
neighbor. And that's just such a powerful experience. So that's one of the things that we're trying to create with this course and with the Yoga Studies Institute.
I'd like to add one more thing to
Yeah.
that, which is that the YSI program is actually 12 years of classics. And we haven't talked about it much, but the master plan is 4 years of the Yoga Sutra, and then 4 years of Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is a beautiful, beautiful ancient yoga text, which focuses more on the physical practices. The Yoga Sutra has 1 or 2 sutras about 1 or 2 verses about physical yoga practice. And then Hatha Yoga Pradipika is a huge, beautiful, beautiful text on the physical eating practices, breathing practices, exercises you can do, different other practices, cleansing practices. And that's another 4 years. And then we have the Bhagavad Gita. And that's all of those courses are ready. All the materials are ready. All the teachers are ready. And I think it's about a major help for your whole life. It's not that you're going to take a course for 2 weeks and then stop. And as Earle said, I think you have this whole community of people around the world who are similar to you, who you can hang out with and help each other practice. We've been helping each other practice for over 20 years. And you keep each other motivated. You encourage each other when you're not doing so well. You push each other. Earle says, let's do our yoga. And so I think the YSI it's built in more than it's 12 years of practice with your community, with your friends around the world. And I think
We're so rich in content.
Yeah.
It's remarkable what we have.
So you're going to have people for at least 12 years.
And I wanted to add something that following on both what Earle and Geshe you said, I appreciate so much that last question about how do you take your yoga to a deeper level, and particularly because very often that the asana practice is the main thing, maybe even the only thing that you have easy access to or ready access to because of the internet and so forth. And I've heard of this thing called the internet, apparently. And so not just to plug the course, but to plug the course, chapter 2 begins with Patanjali laying out actually like a much more concise and deep presentation of yoga. And he says that, the practice of yoga has these 3 components. It has this thing called tapas, which literally means heating, or cooking. So you're like cooking out impurities. It has the second component is swadhyaya, which is study. And that's also what YSI, lays out and makes available. And then this very deep topic, which Geshe will get into, and that's what he calls Ishvara Pranidhana. And that gets translated in many, many different ways. But one thing, the way I've benefited so much from, Geshe-la's insights into this is the idea that, that Ishvara is the teacher or the lineage of teachings, and that there is an opportunity to grow beyond what you think is possible.
Yeah, so we can tap into the lineage. We have to wrap up. Really want to thank you, Geshe Michael and John.